let's can some tomatoes. Start off by obviously washing your tomatoes and coring them and put them on a sheet pan. Now for every sheet pan of tomatoes, I like to add in a quartered onion, an entire onion, and then garlic. You just measure it with your heart. Just cut the end off and set it in here because we're about to roast this entire pan. For a pan this size, like these garlic heads are really small. I would say like 3 or 4 of these. Or if you have giant heads of garlic, maybe 1 or 2. So really just up to your preference. There's no exact measurements in this here. Also another thing, now would be the time to like season this with salt, pepper, and olive oil. But I will actually take these skins off and dehydrate them to make a powder. So I don't want any of that on the skins, but trust me, we are not gonna skimp on the seasoning. All right, now put them in your oven, set it to broil on low, and we are gonna keep this here until the skins start to turn a little brown. All right, now our tomatoes are good and roasted. This is an extra step that I'm doing because I wanna preserve the skins for tomato powder. So you don't actually have to do this step, but this is just one thing that I'm doing. Taking the skins off and putting them in a bowl to put them in my dehydrator. This is still very hot, so I have a nice little cool bowl of water here that I can just dip my hands in and, you know, cool my fingers off. If you want to keep the skins on, you can. I prefer them not to be in my soup, but this is how I'm doing. Now that all of my tomatoes are peeled, I'm going to go ahead and throw them in my blender and blend them up. If you have an immersion blender, then you could put this all in a pot on the stove and blend it with an immersion blender. Once everything's blended up, go ahead and add to your pot. We're gonna add a few more ingredients here in a moment. All right, now that all of your tomatoes and onions and garlic are all blended up, we're gonna add a couple of more ingredients. This would be the time if you wanted to strain out any of the seeds or the larger chunks, then you definitely could before we mix this in. I'm making this a little bit more rustic, so I'm not too worried about it. I blended it really well, but we're gonna add a couple quarts of turkey broth. This is actually smoked turkey broth from our turkey last Thanksgiving. These measurements are not exact. I'm just basing it off of a base recipe, which I'll put in the bottom, in the comments below. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it with the amount of tomatoes I have. When you're working with freshly ripe tomatoes, sometimes you don't have exact measurements. This time it looks like I have about 10-ish pounds. So I'm kind of basing it off of. All right, broth is in. We're gonna put in a few teaspoons of salt, like, I don't know, measure with your heart. That's what we do around here with seasoning. Salt, black pepper, same thing, couple teaspoons of that. Sugar, it's a couple tablespoons. I think this is gonna be close to about a half a cup of sugar. And then some oregano. Once again, I'm gonna dump some in and mix it up and see how it looks. All right, and then lastly, some dehydrated basil from the garden. Obviously, fresh herbs would be a lot better, but I'm using what I have here. So I base the green herbs just off of how it looks. How does it look in the pot once everything is stirred up? I'm gonna let this simmer down a little bit while I prep my jars. So at this point, if you weren't gonna can it, I would simmer this down and really cook it to like the texture, the consistency that you would like. The tomatoes do need to reduce down more. They're slightly undercooked because I'm gonna throw them in the canner and pressure can them for about an hour. But if you're gonna eat it tonight, let it simmer down. I would add a little bit of cream on it, like heavy cream, and then make some grilled cheeses, and this stuff is ready to go. The jars are all sterilized. The soup is done. So now it's time to fill our jars. All right, so jars are filled. I got 7 quarts and 1 pint. This guy I'm just gonna stick in the fridge and we'll eat it in a couple of days. When you're going to process them in the pressure canner, you wanna do 1-inch head space. All right, make sure you debubble, get all those bubbles out. Clean your rims. Time to put on your lids and your ring and load in your canner. Just load it up. All right, put your lid on and then wait for your steam spout to come up and let it run for 10 minutes once it does. All right, so my steam spout has ran for about 10 minutes. Put my stopper on. We're gonna get it up to 12-ish pounds of pressure. These are quarts, gonna run them for 60 minutes, pints 55 minutes. While I'm waiting on my canner, I am loading my dehydrator with all of those tomato skins. Rocking steady at that 12 pounds of pressure. All right, they're done. So we're just gonna pull them out of the canner and let them sit and cool for about 24 hours, and then take the rings off, label them, and you're good to go. So reheat this in a pot, let it simmer for about 10 minutes. If you wanted to add some heavy cream into this, you definitely could. Some Parmesan cheese, and then of course a nice grilled cheese, and this is fantastic. I hope you guys enjoyed this recipe.